Hi there, Stampers. It's Christy from the Stamp Cycle here, and welcome to another edition of the Manic Monday video series featured on my YouTube channel. And I also will have a blog post about this video over on my blog that you can visit, www.thestampcycle.com, and that will have more details on the dimensions and the card. So this is the card we're going to be making today. It features one of the new stamp sets from the 2016 Occasions catalog, and we are going to be doing some watercoloring. Don't let that scare you, because I've actually found that watercoloring, specifically doing it in the method that we're going to do today, is quite easy. So let's go ahead and get started. So the cardstock that you're going to need to make this card, it's very simple. You just need a piece of watercolor paper. This is cut at 4 by 5 1/4 inches. And then for your base, we have a piece of smoky slate cardstock that's cut at 4 1/4 by 11, scored at 5 1/2, and that makes your A2 card base. I'm going to set that aside, and we will work on doing our watercoloring. So for today's card, we're going to be using the stamp set, like I mentioned, from the 2016 Occasions catalog. This stamp set is called Rose Wonder. It also has a matching die set that you can get in a bundle for 15% off, just right off the top. We're going to be using this rose and also the happy birthday sentiment. So I've gone ahead and mounted my rose image onto my largest clear block. This is block F, and we're going to heat emboss that. So before we apply the stamp, you want to run your embossing buddy all over this piece of paper so that we don't get any stray embossing powder in places that we don't want it to be. Now, you'll notice when you're dealing with watercolor paper, it has a textured side and a smooth side. When I'm stamping images, I am going to be watercoloring those, I use the smooth side. I feel like I get a better clear stamped image when I use the smooth side as opposed to the textured sides. So we are on the smooth side. So after applying your anti-static tool, you want to take your Versamark ink and ink up the stamp really well. Give it a good pat with your ink pad. Make sure you get plenty of that Versamark ink. Versamark ink is great for heat embossing. This is a very clear, sticky ink. It clings to embossing powder really well, and you get very nice heat embossed images. So this is the only ink I really use, mostly for heat embossing when I want to do that technique. Okay, so when you have your image nice and inked up, you want to go ahead and then stamp it on your card. Now, if you see from this card, the flower is in the corner. You want to leave room for that sentiment. So line your stamp up to get as far over into the corner as you can without actually going off the paper here. So that looks good. And then give it a nice press. And when I'm dealing with a really big stamp like this, I will leave the stamp on here for just a few seconds extra, just to make sure that all that Versamark transfers to the watercolor paper. Okay? And then you can set that to the side. So now we want to take our embossing powder. This is just white embossing powder from Stampin' Up. And you want to apply that all over your stamped image. So once you get a really nice coating of your embossing powder on your stamped image, you are ready to heat set this. This looks good. Okay. So we can set the embossing powder to the side. And now we want to heat this image. Okay, now that we have our image fully embossed, we want to start watercoloring. So I'm going to take this palette that I purchased from one of the craft stores. I like to watercolor on this because I can move it around, and I can also apply my inks directly onto this piece of plastic and palette and mix my colors there. So what I do when I'm watercoloring is I do tack the image down with just some painter's tape. If this is a brand new piece of painter's tape, I usually will take and run it on my arm like that to get some of the stickiness off so it doesn't tear my paper. I've been working with this piece of painter's tape for a few projects now, so it's not as sticky. So I don't have to do that extra step there. So you want to apply the tape far enough down that it doesn't cover up any of the image here that we're going to be watercoloring. So for the flower, the 3 colors that we're going to use to watercolor this are Pool Party, Island Indigo, and Night of Navy. So how I get the ink on my palette is I just open up the stamp pad, rub it onto my piece of plastic here, and that is where I will add water to mix up the color to then apply to my cardstock. We'll do the Island Indigo up here, and then the Night of Navy. We won't need a whole lot of that color. Okay, and then when I'm watercoloring something like this, you can use aqua painters, but I use paintbrushes. I use a bigger one to wet my image and then the smaller one to apply the colors. So I'm going to set that off to the camera. So the first thing we want to do is wet the entire flower image with some water so that when we do start to apply the color, it will move around the image and move around in the water that we've applied to really give you that nice watercolor look. The great thing about watercoloring embossed images is the embossed edges of the image keep the water in its separated little compartments, if that makes sense. So each of these petals, the embossed image will keep the water in the individual petals so that you can really manipulate the color and how you want it to flow easier than a non-heat embossed stamped image. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so once you have your water applied to your image, now the fun starts. You can actually start watercoloring. So let me zoom in here so you can hopefully see better my watercoloring here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just, you'll see here, I'm just going to take my paintbrush, add quite a bit of water to this, and then we're going to start then coloring the image. So I'm just going to start in the middle, and I'm just tapping my paintbrush and getting that Pool Party color to just flow in the water that we add. When you're drying images like this with your heat tool, you can use the heat tool to push around the water and get neat little streaks of color and the really sharp edges that watercoloring can give you on an image to give you that really nice watercolor look. You could let this naturally dry and then come back in and add color, but this is supposed to be a card that you can make in 15 minutes or less, so we'll use our heat tool to speed up this process so that we can finish the card quickly. So for my background, I'm going to be using Smoky Slate. And I'm going to apply this color all over the card, the watercolor piece around the flower with a very, very diluted color. So I'm going to be adding a lot of water to this ink to really get a very light shading. So you can see that in this card. It's very lightly shaded around the flower. So let's go ahead and I'm going to clean up my surface. I'm going to hit this with the heat tool to speed up the drying. You could at this point set it aside and let it dry on its own, but I want to finish the card for you. So I'm going to heat this with my heat tool, get it nice and dry, and then we will continue with the card. Okay, now that we have used our heat tool to dry the watercolor image, we're ready to finish off the card. Because this watercolor piece is so pretty, I don't want to distract from it with a lot of other things going on. So we're just going to add the birthday sentiment, the happy birthday sentiment from this Rose Wonder stamp set. And that will be just a simple sentiment and won't really take away too much from the rest of our watercoloring. So you can position that on your card. Pick it up with your block. Now we're going to want to hit this with our stamping buddy just to make sure we don't get any stray embossing powder sticking to any of maybe areas that might not quite be dry yet. So definitely hit that again with your anti-static or tool or your heat embossing buddy. Again, we're going to use Versamark ink up this stamp, position it. I have to stand up here to see what I'm doing. Okay. And then we're going to use silver or pewter heat powder for this. Okay, now let's heat set that sentiment. Okay, and then let's layer this onto the piece of Smoky Slate. I'm going to adhere this to the card base with some of my 3M mounting tape. The stuff works really great on watercolored pieces. The cardstock has a tendency to, or the watercolor paper I should say, has a tendency to warp when you watercolor it. And I find that this foam tape really flattens out that watercolor piece and adheres it nicely to your card base. So I like to use this type of adhesive when I'm working with watercolor. Let's center that on the card base. All right, and there you have it. It's a quick and easy watercolor card with using the new Rose Wonder stamp set from the Occasions catalog. So thank you for stopping by today, and I will see you next week.